Mobilization, which does not exist. Minister of Defense of Russia Sergei Shoigu announced the end of the so-called partial mobilization on October the 28th. According to him, about 300,000 people had been mobilized. However, there is still no presidential decree to complete the mobilization.
They make a conveyor precisely because they do not have the opportunity to make this mobilization one time, due to insufficient infrastructure, lack of personnel and conditional tanks, that is, equipment, weapons, uniforms and so on. Of course, they would like to make it fast, however, they cannot, and that's why they have a mobilization conveyor, and nothing at all indicates that it stopped, just as nothing says that it will stop for some reason until Russia loses.
In November, the Russian authorities decided to mobilize prisoners, expand the status of military personnel to members of volunteer groups, and create a database of Russians who should be military registered. In addition, propaganda videos began to be distributed in Russia, calling for people to sign a contract of becoming a soldier or volunteer for the army. This means the covert mobilization to the Russian war in Ukraine may soon be replaced by a second wave of the so-called partial mobilization.
The war will be protracted. It is necessary to prepare for the deterioration of the standard of living in Russian Federation and for new losses on the front line. I am strongly convinced that a new wave of mobilization will begin in January, although the Russian Federation denies this. But nevertheless, by all accounts, they will be forced to start a second wave of mobilization.
The main department of Ukrainian intelligence claims that this war will affect every citizen of Russia. After all, the second wave of mobilization can become even more massive than the first one.
More than 300,000 people were called up during the first wave of mobilization. Half of them were thrown to the front line to plug holes, and at the other half they began to prepare for something. Most likely they will be used as an organizational corps, a mobilization corps for those people who will be called up after the New Year holidays. A more active wave of mobilization will begin in Russia, and according to my calculations, they will try to mobilize from 300 to 500,000 people more.
Paintball helmets instead of combat ones, rubber boots instead of tactical army boots, airsoft body armor instead of military ones, rusty weapons, lack of medicines and even food. Recruits were faced with a shortage of equipment and ammunition in the Russian army in the first wave of the so-called partial mobilization, but it will not be a problem for the new wave.
Those 150,000 mobilized who are being trained now, they are a little more lucky. But those who will be mobilized after the new year will have a different fate. They will be used in the first attack, and 90% of them are usually killed. The purpose of this first wave is to weaken the defense of the enemy, the Ukrainian defense, so they should not leave on the battlefield, roughly speaking, for more than 3 days. And that's if you're lucky.
Russian military commissars and commanders do not count the lives of mobilized men. They are thrown into the hottest spots of the front line, including near Bakhmut, the city which the army of the Federation has been unsuccessfully trying to capture for more than a month. The Russians themselves talk about their huge losses.
They told us to stand to the last. The mobilized are taken from here in packages. Packages. Can you imagine that? And not with only one person inside them. Yesterday they told us to capture the elevator. And how can we do it with only 3 machine guns? But he added, the order was to capture. We tried, and 17 mobilized were immediately killed.
It is real to avoid mobilization for the war, human rights activists say. You can, for example, go abroad or simply not take a summons and do not show up at the military registration and enlistment office, even if they call from there demanding to come. You should also delete your account in state services. If you could not avoid being sent to the front line, the only way for a mobilized Russian not to get killed and not to become a war criminal is to surrender to the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukrainian defenders guarantee all prisoners of war compliance with the Geneva Conventions. You can get advice on how to get into captivity correctly and safely thanks to the I Want to Live project. The phone numbers you can see on the screen. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Valeria Nekapelova, UATV News.